Up next, along the lines of language processing and cybersecurity, we have a fantastic lineup of panelists who will illuminate us on what lies ahead for cybersecurity, examining the latest trends and advances. To enlighten us with their expertise, we have Louis R. Hughes, Chairman and CEO of InZero Technologies, Sean A. Cooper, Director of Government and Public Sector Sales at Team Cymru, Inc., Ram Sarabu, Fractional CTO and CIO of TechCXO, and Nader Zaveri, Senior Manager of Incident Response and Remediation at Mandiant, which is part of Google Cloud. Let's hear it for our panelists.
All right, good morning. We didn't have Kendrick Lamar as the entrance, so I didn't know we could do that. But now I know. So next time I'll get a better entrance music. Can you guys hear me pretty well? Awesome. I have the honor of moderating this panel. Usually I'm on the other side, but very rarely I get a chance to moderate, which I'm really excited about. We have an esteemed panel. I'll do a quick introduction of myself, and then I'll just hand it over to Sean and everyone to be able to introduce themselves so you can get a better understanding of who is in the room. We have some bright minds leading around cybersecurity. So a quick intro of myself. I hate talking about myself, but just something we have to do, right? My name is Nader Zaveri. I am Senior Manager of Incident Response Remediation with Mandiant, which is the foremost leaders of incident response. I have about 15 years of experience. When I say foremost, I usually say in the past 10 years, if you've ever heard of a major hacker breach, 70% to 80% of the time, it's usually us investigating. And that's probably a conservative number, but majority of the time we do not, we never say our name. It's the only way you'll hear us in the news is if the client or their legal counsel has given the sign, the right, okay, say, hey, let's go and say we are doing Mandiant is doing the investigation. A lot of times we're the people behind closed doors. When you get breached or hacked, we're the ones to investigate. So this topic is very near and dear to me because I'm part of the incident response team. We're seeing the latest and greatest threats and trends and see what's happening. So being able to host this panel is an honor of mine. And I'll hand the floor over to Sean to introduce himself.
Thank you. So Sean Cooper, as you heard, I'm Director of Public Sector Sales for Team Cymru is actually how that's pronounced. It's a Welsh name. I won't go into that further, but what our company does, we are the world's largest collector of malicious and activities over the internet globally that we provide and have historically provided to companies such as Mandiant and Google and the likes of things that we have seen and tested. Only a few years ago, where they approached myself and a few others to come and bring that to other areas outside of the intelligence agencies where we resided for about 15 years, to bring that to the rest of the world, the civilian side, the private world. And in my role, I work with government agencies worldwide. My team does, and we bring some of that information so that we can address the threat that is ubiquitous globally, and it affects everyone in this room and on the planet, and mostly to a negative extent. So I am fortunate to be a part of this panel as well. It's an interesting subject. It's something that touches every person, as I spoke about. So hopefully it won't be too much of a boogeyman. It'll scare you too much, but it is what it is. So look forward to the conversation.
Good morning, everyone. Ram Sarabu, partner with TechCXO. as a company, TechCXO, we are pioneers in the space of on-demand C-level executives. So as a CTO partner, I work with a number of high-growth tech companies where I'm advising as a fractional CTO, and cybersecurity is at the front and center of a lot of these high-growth tech companies. So I'm excited to share some of the trends I'm seeing with my clients and the learnings I've had. I'm a developer by training, so my perspective might be different from other panelists here.
I'm Lou Hughes, Chairman and CEO of InZero Technologies. I'm humbled by the qualifications of my respective panel members. As you can tell, I'm a bit older than the group, probably the oldest person in the room at 74. But the only computer language I know was Fortran, which I think goes somewhere before the Old Testament. And I still have an AOL account. I have a Gmail too, but so I am low tech, but I founded a very high tech R&D outfit called InZero, and whereas Mandiant, for example, focuses on detection, remediation, mitigation, our company focuses on prevention. We try to create some technologies that'll prevent you from getting infected in the first place. That's why we call it InZero. Nothing gets in. And we've patented 3 very interesting technologies. One called WorkPlay, which is a highly secure mobile device where one half of your phone is, or your tablet or your PC is dedicated to only what you're doing at work, and the other part is only dedicated to the play side, your personal side. And malware cannot go from one side to the other. Impossible, physically impossible. And it's very clever because you just take an existing smartphone, and with the right combination of code, we convert it into 2 phones. So it's really kind of cool, and it's now being pilot tested by the US government. Then we have another technology called Cloud Safe Passage, and if you got a big company, you get emails, and emails have got viruses in them. The hacker tries to get in that way, and with Cloud Safe Passage, we strip all the malware off your attachments so they won't infect your company in the first place. And it's pretty cool the way it does that. And then finally, we have a very special IoT technology. You know, you see video cameras all around here. Those can be easily hacked and controlled. And there's been all kinds of reports of people doing that. And it's not just in a building. They can do it in a drone. They can do it in a car. And now with the move from 4G to 5G, we're going to see billions of IoT devices being installed all over the planet, and they can all be infected. We have created a technology to make those IoT devices much, much more secure. In fact, the Pentagon arranged a big test, and they invited a bunch of companies, and they had a whole battery of professional hacking teams, over 30 teams. And we were the only company whose device could not be penetrated. They couldn't get into our camera. So it's a small company, but it's got some exciting technologies, and so that keeps me busy. Thank you.
Lou wasn't kidding about the AOL email. When we first got it, I saw the AOL email. I was like, what's happening? Am I getting punked? But there's something to say, somebody keeping it loyal to AOL. It's old school, so I loved it. So keeping with Lou, first question, and then we'll have everyone kind of chime in afterwards, because he comes kind of from the space. How can organizations use threat intelligence to help secure their environment?
Okay. Well, on the threat intelligence side, you know, there are systems that will monitor your enterprise for anomalies, so you'll be using those. The real key now that we're seeing in the industry is a design for, it's got really 3 pillars. It's called design for defense, and then it's called depth and defense, and then zero threat environment. And basically what you try to do is create a structure so that you are going to have a very robust architecture for your company to prevent it from being infected in the first place, and also minimize the number of places where people can attack you in, and have multiple layers of security, that's the defense in depth part, from attacking you. Finally, with this zero trust environment, the last point, what we're really trying to do there is rather than have the traditional firewall, basically, and relying on that to defend your company, you really have to think about something totally different where you actually, if somebody tries to get in your system, you're trying to find out, okay, does that person is he part of our system? Where is he at this time? Does it make sense? Is he, what time is it? Does it make sense that he's contacting the company at this time? It's a very complicated but very robust architecture. So that's kind of where people are moving to in this very data-rich environment that we have.
Awesome. Anybody else wanted to?
Yeah, I'll chime in on, so Threat Intel, which is really part of what my company does, except since we are in the internet, we are actually on the raw intelligence of that. So it's even beyond the threat. We are actually monitoring those activities. So for anybody with a military background, it's called signal. So literally the actual transmission. So from a threat intelligence perspective, it's really the information that the companies need to understand how a lot of these people are acting, how they're moving, what they're doing, what this looks like. This is the DNA of them, so you know how to react and when to react. Because ideally, really, well, I don't want to say there's nothing you can do, but it's really a matter of, if you haven't been attacked and or successfully attacked in your company, it's either ongoing right now and you don't know it, or it's something that you're probably going to have to deal with. So it's really not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So that threat intel helps with that.
Ron?
Yeah, one additional point I'd love to make is when it comes to threat intelligence, I'm a technologist, and relying on tools, relying on automation, especially when I work with B2B SaaS companies quite a bit, and when developers are writing code right into the development pipelines, if you inject your tooling to actually scan the code, because there are a lot of vulnerabilities that could be introduced into your product without you knowing. So if you use the right tooling, you have the most the basic stuff, like even OWASP top 10 vulnerabilities. So you've got that handy, and you've educated your workforce, then you're miles ahead of what the industry is doing.
Just to kind of add on some additional color commentary. So with threat intelligence, every organization, if you guys are not part of it, should be part of an ISAC information sharing group. If you're in financials, get your FS ISAC, in the health, because a lot of I'm seeing it from when you do get breached, a lot of times we get a incident based off of, hey, we received an alert from our ISAC that had this specific IP from a threat actor. We plugged it into our software, and it turned out we had the same type of activity. Yeah. So getting ahead and being able to be part of these information sharing groups, because at the end of the day, I'm working closely with the government, with NIST, which is the JCDC initiative, which is the Joint Public-Private Partnership, where we're going to try to remove the barriers of, there's a kind of taboo wanting to say you got hacked. It's no shame in the game. As Sean said, everyone has gotten hacked. It's just a matter of when, or a matter of, heck, you probably didn't even know, right? It's more of, we want to remove that negative connotation, so then people are more free to say, hey, we got hacked, but here's the stuff that we saw the actors do, threat actors do, so we can help defend the next guy. And that's going to be the key thing, is being able to share threat intelligence as much as possible. And just to add on, if you've got to be on these information sharing groups, and you do it privately, you could have a private organization, don't want to be chiming in Mandiant threat intelligence. There's a great CrowdStrike, other private organizations, but getting in touch, knowing your FBI contact, who is in your local office, get your local FBI cyber contact. They'll be able to give you the latest and greatest as well. Next question, this is actually for Ram. Seeing as with his being at a partner level, how can you convince the board or other C-level executives to take cybersecurity more seriously?
That's a great question. As I said, I work with a number of high-growth tech companies, so I get to work with a wide spectrum on the cybersecurity maturity. Especially the companies that I work with that are backed by VC funds or PE funds, they are more sophisticated boards because they know cybersecurity is important. So it's really, you walk into this board and they are the ones who are asking for what the cybersecurity posture is, where are you on the maturity cycle, and they want that to be reported. Investments into cybersecurity is never an issue, but on the other hand, on the lower end, where the early stage startups that are so focused on building the product and where they have the workforce who is not as tech savvy, because I work with, for example, one of the clients I recently started working with is a healthcare tech company, and the majority of the company is or nurses and come from clinical background. So the simple stuff like training on phishing emails, how to detect spam, becomes a challenge for an organization like that. So you kind of have to plan for a budget, build into your budget planning that cybersecurity is important. And so yeah, but on the lower end of the startups where budgets are limited, I'm a big fan of prioritizing where you get the most bang for the buck. Some simple basic cybersecurity measures like multi-factor authentication. How many here have MFA turned on your bank accounts, financial accounts, emails? Yeah, you'd be surprised how many people still do not have MFA turned on some of the critical accounts, right? And I walk into some of these clients where the employees have never had any security-focused training. Or they don't have phishing and spam filtering in place. Some of the basics, right? Or backups, for example. Backups are important because, as Nader said, it's inevitable that you will have a security incident, and you could get lucky. You may not have one, but when you are hit with it, backups are so critical. So you have to be able to protect your data and have a backup of your data, and it's important. And it's a mindset shift, and it's a journey. It's a journey, and working with these boards and showing how other companies in that space, how other mature PE-backed companies, VC-backed companies are performing is an easy sell to some of these organizations.
Just to add to what Ram was saying, over the last 30 years, I've served on 13 board of directors of very large multi-billion-dollar companies in 8 different countries. Often in those companies have served on the audit committee where they look at computer hacks and that sort of things, and chairing those committees. There's been an evolution in the corporate world. You know, first, IT systems were very much dedicated to the company. Now they've moved to the cloud, and then with the creation of the smartphone devices, we see, and remote working, we see our employees dealing with the company's data outside the physical perimeter of the company itself and having very important data. And we've also seen that with the rise of the Internet of Things, that many important parts of our factories or our supply chains or our energy networks are being controlled by these internet-driven devices. And the companies were first slow to recognize how vulnerable they were. It was very much like Sean said, there was a lot of denial. And in fact, if a company comes to me and says, oh, we don't have a problem, that's when all the alarm signals should go off, because they have a problem, they have a huge problem, and they don't even know it. What companies did is first they hired chief intelligence officer, or chief IT officer. Then they now are hiring chief information security officers to work with them. And so that's an important development, but IT security is very, very much a boardroom topic of discussion. Because people know that if they have a major failure inside the company or in their products or the services or systems that they provide to other companies, their liabilities are huge. And in every single one of the companies where I've served on the board, Deutsche Bank, Nokia, which is a very sophisticated company, British Telecom, they've all had massive hacks, And it's just, what do you do about it, you know? So it's very much a front and center topic within those boards now.
So those are for organizations that, like, if you're on the board, right, and you have a cyber background, that's a good indication that that organization has already taken cyber seriously if they have somebody from a cybersecurity background. What about for those organizations that have a board that are not so cyber focused or do not quite understand the ramifications of cyber on their organization? I think, Sean, you mentioned something about the boogeyman tactic. Is that a tactic you try to use?
Well, it depends. And, you know, since I work in the public sector, that's not always a good idea, but I've been walked out of buildings before. But for that tactic, when I actually handed them bad news of things that my guys found that they didn't realize was just open to the general public. So if there's not any focus on security, and ideally in just a pure cultural standpoint, an analogy I use often is when you're building homes, how many locks do they put on your doors? Typically it's just the door handle, maybe one other lock, a bolt. Depending on where you live, you know, you're putting on a whole lot of aftermarket things on there. That's where cyber is now perceived in the development world. We're an afterthought. It's pretty well known in our world that when, you know, Microsoft and all of these guys launch these new products, that the vulnerability of those products is on the internet hours after that's been launched. So the bad guys already know how to attack you.
Right.
So your response is, how do I deal with that? You've got to have some sort of risk management mentality, which is the kind of the new buzz term we're using in our world, so it doesn't sound so much like the boogeyman, because everybody's used to using insurance as risk management. The difference with that is that, you know, yeah, you have car insurance, but what if you never had a car accident? But from cyber, you're going to have an issue. So risk management is important.
Awesome. And staying with you, Sean, Ram mentioned some general hygiene tips. What are some more kind of general hygiene tips a organization should be implementing at the bare minimum in order to help secure the environment?
Absolutely, and I think Ram really hit on a bunch of those pretty clearly. I mean, the multi-factor authentication is something to pursue. Obviously, if you're a smaller entity and newer, it might be something beyond your reach up front, but definitely having some level of training. The bad guys are really good. They are really good. So you have to have an understanding about phishing. You have to have an understanding. As we were sitting at the table, I got one of those phone calls on my cell phone. You know, they are nonstop coming. And who am I? I mean, it's not like I'm somebody who. So just basically having some level of understanding that the threat is, as I said earlier, ubiquitous. It is nonstop. A lot of it, you know, there was earlier talks about, you know, ChatGPT and AI, all of that stuff. All these attacks are automated. There are people behind them, but they are pushing out billions of bots that are just doing the work that's amazing, and it's terrifying. Mm-hmm. And it, you know, when I got into cyber 18 years ago, I almost thought, like, my kids are now grown. I just wanted to take away all the cell phones and just get off. Just don't do this. But it is what it is. That's what we have to deal with. And just understand that, know that you are a potential or under threat, and be careful with emails that you see, with phone calls you got. Don't click on links if you don't understand them. You know, I'm going through this with my mother, who's a retired engineer, who's elderly, and is not always thinking about these things now. So just be careful. That's all I can offer.
Ram, Blue, any additional?
I think on hygiene practices, well, of course, education and multi-factor authentication are very important. You really want to start with a comprehensive risk assessment of your company, first of all. You got to understand the lay of the land, you know. But it comes back to that whole thing, security by design. But then afterward, of course, you've got to have frequent changes of passwords. You've got to have encryption. You may want to use biometrics. You'll need analytics. There's got to be continuous testing of your system for vulnerabilities. You've got to have a diagnostic capability. Where is the problem? And of course, then mitigation strategy. So, I mean, any company has got to have those key elements in place to be safe.
Yeah, I can't emphasize enough on the backups. I once had a client, and this is not even a client who is not technically trained or anything. He's got education from MIT and refused to do backups because his argument was that's a waste of money, and unfortunately his company was hit with the ransomware, and when it's unfortunate, but when people are hit with an incident is when they realize the value of cybersecurity. Until then, ignorance is bliss, so people are oblivious, and those of us and most of us here in the tech world, we know how, as Sean mentioned, how these hackers are so sophisticated. And one of my employees, she was upset why hackers were targeting her, and I was like, it's not just you, and they are hitting everyone, and they are trying with brute force. They're guessing what your email is and what kind of information you're putting out on the internet. So there's so much of public information that we put out on social media and on LinkedIn. It's amazing. I've seen a pattern where a new employee joins the company and they get a lot of spam, and with a text message from the CEO saying they were like they need gift cards or something, and there are people who fall for these traps.
Sure.
It's no matter how much you educate, because it's these bad guys are relentless. They find you at the most vulnerable moment, and it's only afterwards the people realize how naive and how vulnerable they were. But so training and backups, I think, are bare necessity.
Yeah, and I think with backups, there's the concept called a 3-2-1 backup strategy. Have 3 different copies, 2 different types with 1 offline. The 1 offline is the key. If you don't
Very
have
important.
an offline copy, if you get hit with ransomware, most likely it's going to be encrypted as well. Because
Right.
that's how threat actors are now targeting, is they're encrypting backups before they encrypt a lot of other machines.
Just a couple of statistics. 83% of all breaches are from external attacks, and over 50% of those attacks are on credentials, your passwords. And about 15% are phishing, about 24% are ransomware. So, I mean, the people are, as they say, they're relentless. They're absolutely relentless. And then it's just amazing, though, how simple we are. There was a survey that said that 71% of employees store sensitive work passwords on their personal phone, which we know has no security. That's how this stuff gets out. 66% of employees use their personal texting apps for work use. So, I mean, when you've got numbers like that, you're just creating a field of opportunity for these guys to steal your credentials, and that's exactly what's happening.
Yeah, and
That's how they
definitely
get in.
Yeah, no, that's great stats as well. And one of the things to look at when you are looking at credentials, your credential has probably already been breached by a previous breach.
Oh, yeah.
There's a thing called haveibeenpwned.com. Make sure that if you are ingesting threat intelligence, ingest the Have I Been Pwned database and assess those passwords when you're doing a pen test. When you are having a third party, assess your passwords against that type of database.
Yeah.
Because they're just taking that, or they're using credential harvesting techniques, or essentially getting things like a red line sealer, which is a way of getting things from the dark web, a tool to get threats. One thing we mentioned multi-factor authentication, MFA or 2FA. I will mention this. Not all MFA is equal. So ensuring that you have a proper strong MFA. Now, what is strong MFA and what is weak? What is weak is the weakest form would probably be an SMS text. What we're seeing now, and specifically from the cases that I've been doing in the past 6 months, we're seeing a lot of organizations get breached who have SMS-based text messages because the threat actors, we call them UNC 3944, CrowdStrike calls them scattered spider. They are doing SIM swapping techniques. So they are getting during the maintenance window for major telecom corporations and being able to, while you go to sleep, by the time you go to sleep, they come in and perform a SIM swapping technique. And by the time you wake up, they've already done their business. They're already in the environment.
Wow.
So they've already swapped it back to your actual phone, your SIM card. So that way they can perform. So they're still MFAing. So that like I said, not all MFAs are the same. There is authenticator apps. That's a good start. Make sure if you have push notification, turn that off. A lot of organizations will just, the way it works is they have push notifications because it's a lot more friendly for everyone to utilize, but it's going to be friendly for a threat actor. They'll just, what is called MFA fatigue. They'll just keep putting the push notifications until somebody just hits the approve. And they just need one approval to then get in and perform their business. So ensuring that you have strong authentication, you have what is called number matching. With Azure has something called Azure MFA with number matching, which not only puts in with the Azure Authenticator app, you also have to input in additional numbers, and you can see where that MFA request is coming from because they geolocate the request. And then there's something called FIDO2 keys, which is a UB key that is attached to your computer, and that is the strongest. It's called phishing resistant type. So definitely MFA, but ensuring what types of MFA is strong versus weak, and ensuring that you are performing kind of the strongest of them. You had mentioned Gen AI, ChatGPT. This is kind of for everybody in the audience, so whoever wants to chime in first. How do you see generative AI, ChatGPT, Bard, affect or change the cyber threat landscape?
Yeah, this question has been at the top of everyone's minds, especially in a number of my clients. And everyone talks about how easy ChatGPT is, and it's helping them answer all these questions. But something basic that people don't recognize is when you are putting in anything into the ChatGPT window or app, that's publicly now potentially exposed. So you cannot put any sensitive information that's proprietary to your company or to your individual in a ChatGPT window. And however, you can leverage generative AI technology through OpenAI technology or any of the APIs. And that's an important distinction, right? So having those governance models, and bigger companies are establishing these governance models quickly, but it's the small players, the small companies that it's impossible for these, it gets hard to educate what you can do, what you cannot do. And it goes back to, again, the training your workforce, what you can do, what you cannot do. But I believe we are only at the cusp of what the impact could be from these generative AI tool set.
Yeah, so one of the things I've seen good organizations do, there's basically two major approaches. One is block the entire capability for your computer's corporate assets to get to ChatGPT to Bard, right? Wow. That's a more drastic approach, but if you have a corporate policy, you have to have a governance model. Your corporate policy must state that. Or at the bare minimum, what you can probably do right now as an organization, Monday morning, or Friday, or whenever you get back to work, have at least a notification come up. If somebody accesses chat.openai.com, a notification pops up that please do not add any corporate sensitive information or materials. That's the bare minimum you can do. It's not that hard from a technology standpoint. It's not going to be resistant from a general user base, and something that you'll be able to at least just remind people when they are getting into ChatGPT and Bard and other types of, that they are able to ensure that they're not putting private, they're putting what we like to call dummy data in order to extract their specific. But what I'm seeing now, right, we haven't seen an influx of ChatGPT based attacks, but what we know is ChatGPT can create what is called phishing campaigns, right, pretty automatically. In the beginning, if you asked it to create a malware or ransomware, it was doing that. They kind of changed that after the first month, and everyone was realizing, oh wow, that's probably not a good thing to do, to give people the carte blanche capability who have no coding, because creating ransomware requires, that is already a filter by design, right? You have to have a certain level of knowledge to create that. Now you're giving every Tom, Dick, and Harry the capability of creating a malware and ransomware. That's not a good thing. But there's ways out of it, right? I've seen a lot of from the Twitter sphere where people can basically convince the algorithm, the ChatGPT or whatever you're using, to create it without explicitly stating it. So that's another thing. So that is one thing that we're seeing a lot is the automatedness, the ease of access of the things that require, not your general script kiddie to be able to perform, but kind of the higher echelon of hackers. Any additional kind of points?
No, I would just say it's complicated. Everybody cannot drive or fly a plane. So to a certain extent, that is what you're giving people the keys to. Obviously, if you had done that, you'd have a whole lot of crashes, aviation fatality. So I'm still the jury's out in my world. My company doesn't allow it, but it's something that we're all just watching.
So when you say your company, when organizations are not allowing it, are they saying a corporate policy? Are they putting technical controls in place? What do you feel like there's governance control we talked about, which is policy, which is just a paper policy, right? You just put it on your policy. There's going to be no generative AI based type of sites that are going to be used with corporate assets. Is there also technical controls in place by organizations that you're seeing?
Well, there's a little bit of all of the above. There was a lot of different ideas, as most people did, who said, hey, this could really simplify a lot of things that we do that are so manually intensive that we could minimize. And then we all had that same conversation, well, what if somebody gets a hold of this? This is some of our IP. How does that get out into the public? We just don't want to have that. So we really have just basically shut the door on it, and we're just sort of peering through the blinds and watching how this thing evolves.
Yeah, and I think people should realize the data that ChatGPT and other generative AI platforms are getting is our data, right? Same thing with artists. That's why generative AI art is a big problem for those in the creative field, like generative AI images. How can it's being trained on actual people's IP. And that's kind of some of the ethical concerns where the data you are putting in. So the good thing is ChatGPT is based off of September 21st. So all data added to September 21st, but it's going to get connected to the internet pretty soon. BARD is connected to the internet. So it's going to continuously try to train its model. And one thing I think we talked about a little bit earlier is generative AI has a bias. There's a racial component bias, heavy, especially AI images, heavy on the racial component bias. There's bias on because at the end of the day, it's getting information from the internet and then trying to train that. So if it's bad information on the internet, it's going to train on bad information. So that's why a lot of organizations want to take a more hard line approach with their assets being able to touch. We have about 5 minutes. And I know we wanted to kind of get the audience questions. So if there are any questions from the audience, I want to definitely give everyone their capability. I think we have mic skin passed around. Or you want to put in the middle? Yeah, let's put in the middle.
AI, have you seen anything with injecting through like Google Tag Manager, third-party JavaScripts to train potential actions to interrupt the search journey of that given brand? Have you seen anything related to that? Because that's one of the concerns around training the model. Like when Google Lens came out, and you could train your imagery for your brand off of Google Lens, there were ways to interrupt that as well.
Yeah, so what we're seeing is, that's a great question, and we haven't seen it from a threat actor perspective, right? So I have a unique position in cyber where we're seeing it after it's been used by threat actors, or I do also proactive assessments as well, but we haven't seen threat actors utilize that. But just being in the cybersecurity community, there are talks of injecting into JavaScripts, injecting into the search to be able to, sometimes even inject faulty data, right, to output a certain thing to kind of manipulate the way the algorithm is working. So we haven't seen it from a frontline standpoint, but I think you're right on the money in the sense of it is on its way, but we haven't seen it because we're talking about Gen AI. Nobody 95% of the world didn't know what Gen AI was until ChatGPT came and like wreaked havoc in December of or November of 2022. So now I think we're barely wrapping our heads around it, and it's just a matter of time before the threat actors start utilizing it.
Yeah, I do a lot on the bot management side because I'm in SEO. So I'm looking at it from a slightly different lens than cybersecurity, but I do see the potential play you can do, especially with things like WordPress sites that are using third-party plugins or vulnerabilities in third-party pixels. Doesn't understand that you just can't plug anything in or load things up in Google Tag Manager and not pay attention to what you've left there.
Yeah, definitely. And WordPress has a new vulnerability every week.
Yeah.
Seems like it that has to be fixed. I think there's another question.
Yep.
Louis, Sean, Ram, did an excellent job. Appreciate for all the insights. For middle managers, IT leaders on the C-suite level, looking to protect their companies in the form of ransomware insurance. Could you provide some guidance on where to start, maybe some best practices? At least from my understanding, what companies are doing now is it's not an a la carte option, and they try and bundle it with all the other bells and whistles, like conducting the pen test. So any insight on how the policies are underwritten and even where to start?
So I work very closely with insurance providers just because of the nature of what we do. If you don't have cyber insurance, you definitely want to get that. And actually what I've been hearing, just because we talk with a lot of cyber insurance providers, if you have an older policy, you probably got a great deal, because those policies are going straight through the roof. Because I've heard from multiple cyber insurance companies, they are losing money because they did not quite grasp ransomware would have been that heavy. If you look at maybe 2018, 2019 is when you started seeing some more ransomware, and then 2019, 2020, it's when it just blew up.
Can I just a quick question for those who may not know? So a cyber security insurance policy is going to be the umbrella to the ransomware policy itself. So
Yeah.
they're not.
So it's sometimes, yeah, it's all about how you create the policy. You can ask them, will you do the payment? Also, one thing what we notice is during a investigation, do they provide their list of forensic approved folks? Because you need to have their approved folks in order for them to pay out, but also ensure that they are doing a remediation of the incident. A lot of times they just focus on the investigation. The remediation has to be, you have to foot the bill. And my team works on the remediation containment side, and it has to be so specific to what the incident is that they aren't able to, let's say, pay the extra amount. So ensuring that, they are covering ransomware cost up to X amount of dollars, but also ensuring that remediation is there as well. Last question, I think we have about 20 seconds.
So between the spectrum of all the things typically SaaS vendors, software vendors, and IT departments can do, do you advocate like extremes, like each of these actually have an in-house purple team? Or what would you say how important it is for example, Microsoft Policy Analyzer, those kind of protective blue team approaches? And I mean, would you just say, just why not all of these people just have their own purple teams, red, blue, everything?
For each SaaS-based product, I think that may be a little bit overkill with having a purple team, but understanding SaaS-based threats and having an internal corporate purple team that can then perform those types of attacks and see if there's that. I think that might be, Ram was talking about prioritization, right? We want to be able to ensure the priority of the organization makes the most sense, where, you don't want to look at individual vendors, you want to look at what we call TTPs, tools, techniques, and procedures of how threat actors. That will then help you understand the basic threats and trends and all that.
So basically, IT departments should.
Yeah, the organization should have a, with a good purple team, you should have your blue team and if you have a pen testing team, or just get a third party to do your purple team, and usually that's the best bet. And I believe that is it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.